Okay, hi. So today what I want to talk about is a book that I just finished rereading called 1984. If you've never read it, I really highly recommend it. And if you've already read it, then you know what I'm talking about. If you've never read it and you want to come back to this, like read it and then come back. If you don't care, then stick around, right? But basically, this story revolves around the main character whose name is Winston, and he lives in the year 1984. For context, this book was written in like the 50s or the 60s. I can't. I'll fact check that, but you know, George Orwell imagined what the world would be like in 1984, right? The future. And just everything that he wrote, everything that he thought the world was going to be, he was off by a couple of years, right? But I think even, in 1984, we might have already been headed in this direction. But 2026, it's a lot more prevalent, it's a lot more obvious. It's undeniable because in the story, Winston lives in a very fascist, just hyper surveillanced world where everybody is kind of just on edge because you never know when it'll be you, right? So there is a thing in the story called the thought police, and they basically want to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're doing, what you're saying, what you want, what you feel, just everything. And they have, I believe it's pronounced telescreens, which are basically just these screens that constantly, it's just a constant stream of like propaganda and just like brainwashing kind of messages. And they also watch you and listen to you, so it's kind of like a two-way kind of thing. And they're in every house, and they're just on the street everywhere. You don't know if your coworkers, your neighbors, even your spouse, right? Your children, even, goodness. They all are just constantly monitoring you and will turn you in to the thought police if they suspect that you oppose the party or Big Brother, which is basically just the fascist, government, the powers that are in that world. And the whole story, he knows that there's so much more to life. He knows that the world that he is living in is not right. The party expects you to reject what your eyes see and what your ears hear. Just completely ignore that. And whatever the party is feeding to you, that is absolute truth. And there's no record of anything. History is constantly being rewritten so that the party is always correct, always right, never wrong, never fails. Everybody just lives impoverished, just poverty, a constant state of war, just you can't even love somebody truly, right? In this story, if you get married, it's just to reproduce, and that's just what it is. You don't love the other person. Your children are just waiting to turn you in because they are indoctrinated at a very young age of joining the spies, right? Which is very reminiscent of like the Hitler Youth, because they are just brainwashed. They're just brainwashed, and that's just the world that he lives in. And in the end, and I cried once I reread the ending. I cried because these kids almost got run over, but they're being funny about it. Anyways, I totally just lost my train of thought, but the point is, that just came back to me. Right, in the end, they get to him, right? So he ends up having an affair with another party member, and which is extremely just prohibited. And he's having an affair with her, and he grows to love her. They fall in love, and he wants to rebel. He wants to join what I guess like a rebel kind of militia type of thing is like the Brotherhood, and just rebel, just somehow destroy Big Brother, the party, just the world that he is living in, that is just oppression, being suppressed, just controlled, monitored, just not any sort of freedom, just nothing of substance, just nothing good. And in the end, they catch him and they torture him, and he, you know, the last words of the book are that he loves Big Brother. You know, they get to him, they kind of brainwash him, they torture him to the point where he just submits and the story ends. And that, you know, is frightening. It's frightening because every day I feel just the world gets sicker and just more, it just is headed in that direction, you know, because and it's funny because people can say, oh, like, this is just so not like reality, right? Like, it's not reality. And maybe that's true, but considering where we are now, just everything that is happening, I can't help but think that we're already living in 1984, right? Like, we're already living in that world. It's just not in our face, right? It's not as obvious, it's not just out in the open, but every single day we move closer and closer that it's going to get to the point where it just will be so obvious. It'll just, they won't hide anymore, they won't pretend, they won't act like that's not what they're doing, right? And I have notes, I have this whole thing prepared, but just I wanted to break it down so that if in case you've never read this book and you're like, I'm not gonna read it, which again, you should read it. It's a really good story, it's very eye-opening. I did make some notes, and I do just want to talk about it because there are some examples of just things that are happening in the real world, right? Our real world, that relate to this story, right? Comparisons and just similarities. So the first thing I want to talk about is so like justice, right? So in the story, when the thought police get you, right, because they have been watching you, if somebody turns you in, you know, what have you, the party will not give you a fair trial. There is no trial, there's no court. It's just, you're guilty, whether you're really guilty or not. Like, you're guilty and you'll be punished and no questions asked. There's no lawyer, there's no court, just nothing. You don't get a fair trial. And truly, I think that has already been happening, because the amount of just people who are wrongly convicted and then spend decades in prison until way after the fact, their whole life has gone by, and then somehow they're proven innocent and then are compensated with just money, which I'm like, no amount of money could give you those years back to you. Just, there's no shot, there's just nothing that they could offer you or give to you that would be proper compensation, right? And there's still a lot of people in jail, in prison right now, that their sentence and just the crime, if they even committed it, is just not, there's no equivalence, I think. But another thing that I sort of touched on another video is how they're already using prisoners to work in like fast food restaurants, just without pay. They're just forced to work, which is just slavery. It's blatant slavery, it is. But it's just disguised as, oh, you're just serving your prison sentence, but that's not, like, that's free labor, okay? So that is slavery. And another thing that I have kind of talked about, but I didn't necessarily bring up this point, is how, you know, AI really is ruining everything aside from just the environment, right? Because that's a really big point. But what I have been thinking about is how people can use AI to frame other people, right? So if, let's say, somebody, you know, your neighbor, whatever, whoever, doesn't like you, wants to fuck with you, they could just make an AI video, voice recording, picture, whatever, right, to fabricate false evidence against you, to just point a finger and say this person's guilty, here's the evidence, right? And I'm not gonna say that AI has reached a point where you can't not tell that it's fake. I think, at least for me, if you look very closely, you can tell that something is AI. But considering it's just ramping up, it's only a matter of time before it gets to be that good where you're like, I actually don't know if this is real or not. And something that I thought about, that I remembered, I'm gonna pull it up and I'll put it here, but there's this story of this teenage girl who committed suicide because some boys in her school created like fake, just inappropriate images of her and were spreading them around, and nobody did anything. The school didn't do anything. I don't think there's any laws yet, right? Like, I don't think there's any laws to be able to persecute people for that. And she ended up, dying. And I think that is a prime example of just how just irresponsible it is to use AI to have the public be able to access, things like software and just things to be able to do that, because that poor girl, right? Like, that, a literal child was a victim of that. And so to me, I think it's only a matter of time before people start to use it for even more. Just that in itself is diabolical, but it's only a matter of time before people start to use it to try to just ruin other people's lives in a court of law, right? And I think there's already a lot of corrupt judges and just people in the system, obviously, but they want you to question like yourself. Like, can you actually trust yourself? Can you trust what you're seeing? Like, if you can't even trust what you're looking at and what you're hearing, like, that's a major issue. I don't know how else to say that. That's just, major. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was just like oppression. So kind of what I already touched on is how when the thought police does capture Winston, they do brainwash him, they torture him. So they do have different like ministries, at least the government, right, that is in charge of different things, and I'll just say them. So it's the Ministry of Truth, which is basically like controlling the news, entertainment, education, and fine arts. The Ministry of Peace, which concerns itself with war. The Ministry of Love, which maintains law and order. And the Ministry of Plenty, which is responsible for economic affairs. Which, you hear that and it's like the Ministry of Peace is in charge of war, and the Ministry of Love is in charge of law and order. And when the thought police does get you, they take you to the Ministry of Love, and that is where you are basically tortured and brainwashed, and just, room 101, once they drag you in there, it's like the worst thing you can imagine. And that's kind of just, that's how they get you. That's what they're trying to do now. Which is to watch all of us, hear everything, just know everything about you, have a whole record of everything about you. Because in the story, when Winston eventually is taken to room 101, right, his fear is rats. And so to torture him, they use rats. And listen, there is a portion of the book, right, where they are describing the torture, and just like where he's screaming and he's so afraid. And then it sort of just jumps to his life after that, where he's just in the world again. They let him go. And he didn't actually write what happened next. I think that's on purpose, which is to kind of not help you, but I guess to be able to just fill in the blank yourself, right? Like, the worst thing that you could possibly imagine to happen is probably what happened. Like, just, they know everything about you, they know what you're afraid of, they're using it against you to torture you, and then just once you're already there, like, what happens next? Like, that part was just so like frightening to me, because the places where your mind goes, where you think about just how there's no limit for them. There's no limit. They torture you to be brainwashed. There's no limit. There's just, they'll do whatever it takes to get you to submit, to break you. And that is fucking just, that's scary. That's scary. But another thing that also really frightened me is how they managed to put fake memories into his brain. And I know that maybe I'm like all over the place, but stay with me. Towards the end, when he's sort of just talking, and you know, it's right before the story ends, but he is he's remembering something, and then he says, I don't even know if that really happened. I don't think it did. I think that's a false memory. You know, in the story, the woman that he has an affair with, her name is Julia. He's talking to her, and she says, you know, if you can still feel, if you can still think, that makes you human. Like, you've already got them beat, because they cannot get inside of you. They cannot force you. They cannot alter your thoughts. They can't, right? And I don't know, maybe I missed it, but from what I like, when I read it, it didn't seem like impossible. They planted false memories into his head where he was just like, I don't even know if that really happened or not, right? Like, again, there's no limit. There's no limit, because you think of like all of the MK Ultra, like just tests and all of that shit that they were doing. Like, you know, Ted Kaczynski lost his fucking mind. Like, they fucked with him so bad that he just went off the deep end, right? And so experimenting on humans, doing the unthinkable to other humans, like, that's been happening. Who knows what they've managed to just invent. Just and maybe I'm not saying anything here, maybe this is just me like speculating and just being afraid, but like I think about that, and it's like, we're already so just like advanced in all the wrong ways in terms of just like weapons of mass destruction and just like disgusting, scary things like that. Who's to say that they don't have a way of just doing just fucked up shit like that? We're just getting in your head, like being able to torture someone to the point where you can brainwash them. Like, being brainwashed already exists in this world. Who knows what they're even. So my next point is war and poverty, and how constantly being at war keeps us all living in poverty. So in the story, Winston lives in a country called Oceania. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's how you pronounce it. But they are constantly at war with East Asia and Eurasia. And in the story, the enemy is constantly changing. Sometimes it's East Asia, the next thing you know, it's Eurasia, to the point where Julia, right, when Winston is talking to her about just war and the constant like bombs that are being dropped on London, right, she says she doesn't believe that the war is actually happening. She doesn't even realize when the enemy changes. The US has been constantly at war since, goodness, I don't even know, just the whole entirety of the 20th century leading now into the 21st century. Like, we're just constantly in a war, even if we're not the one who's perpetuated it, right? Like, instigated it, I mean. Just a constant state of war. And she, you know, Julia says that she believes that the whole like enemy dropping bombs on them isn't real either, that it's just Oceania doing it itself, just killing its own citizens, and just constantly at war. And I really believe that that's real, right? A lot of people don't think that like 9/11 really happened, that it was just the US who did it themselves, which honestly, who's to say? But considering, I'm gonna go ahead and say that yes, it was not some outside enemy or whatever. Like, it was totally the US, and it's kept us in a perpetual state of just victimhood. War crimes are just normalized as well, right? When somebody does something to us, it's the end of the world. It's this horrible, horrific, unimaginable just thing. But when the US commits war crimes and does really heinous shit, it's seen as almost just like patriotic. Like it's a given. It's right. It's excused. It's okay. And that's kind of just how they control a lot of people who are ignorant, who can't think for themselves, right? And I'm not gonna say which group of people I'm talking about, but there are people who really believe that they are patriots, that this country is just the greatest, fucking thing, when in reality it's the exact opposite, right? That's how they control you. They make you believe that you being so patriotic, loving your country, going above and beyond for your country is noble, that you are noble, that supporting the troops is noble. But really, they're just terrorists that go to other countries, commit war crimes, just the worst fucking shit, and it's something to celebrate, it's something to praise. And that's not true. And it's really upsetting because the military, the police, any war that we're involved in ultimately keeps us living in poverty. Okay? And people don't want to hear that. That's a hard pill to swallow, to realize and accept. The whole reason why you've been living in poverty is just for a reason that isn't even valid. That is not good enough for why you have to live the way that you live, right? But you think, I'm a patriot, right? I'm doing my part, so it's okay. I'll suffer, even though I am suffering, it's okay because I'm doing my part. And that's not right. That's what they want you to believe. They want you to just accept that and just move on and continue to live this way when it doesn't have to be this way, right? So I did write this. When something heinous happens in your country and the leaders of your country tell you it was someone else, you blindly believe and accept it as truth because you're so brainwashed you cannot fathom the very thing you love and worship, this country, is what is just causing you that harm, killing you, your children, and making you believe that your fellow man who had nothing to do with it, right, that you have to hate them. You have to hate them and you have to attack them, kill them. Whatever happens to them, it doesn't matter because they did something to you. When, false flags, right? 9/11 is a prime example of that, because even now people use that as justification for why they hate certain people, for why certain things are just okay because, we were victims that one time. But it's like, the more that you look into that, the more damning the evidence is that it was self-inflicted. We're constantly at war. The enemy is always changing. Even when they tell you, we're done attacking these people, now we're gonna attack these group of people, that hatred that you felt for the other group of people in the first place, right, lingers, and then everybody who even is remotely just related to them, looks like them, you hate them. Why? Because the leaders of your country told you to, because you're so brainwashed, because you truly believe that your hatred is justified when they probably haven't even done anything. And I'm not here to say that every other country outside of the US is perfect and they have done no wrong, but for the most part, right, the US is the one. They are the ones. They are the war criminals who go and terrorize the rest of the world, and just anything happening in the world, war related, where people are dying, where people are suffering, the US has played a part in that. So the next point I want to talk about is union and unity. So in the story, there is the party members, and then the proles. And the proles are basically just common folk who are all poor, left to themselves. The party doesn't really bother with them, except for just dropping bombs on them and just keeping them all working, right? Slaving away, just doing grunt work, right? Just slavery. and I did write this down from like the book. It's physical rebellion is at present not possible. The proles must realize that the world could be other than it is. Things could be different. If only the proles could somehow see their own strength, no one would have to conspire in secret. They would just have to rise up together. Everyone is too stupid, unaware, conditioned, and afraid to see the bigger picture, our real problems. Because of the lack of education, fear, being blinded by unimportant issues, and poverty, it makes it hard to focus on what really matters. So, in describing the proles, right, it says they were born, they grew up in the gutters, were middle-aged at 30, and then died. All they did was heavy physical work, the care of home and children, petty quarrels with neighbors, films, football, beer, and above all, gambling. Thought police moved always among them, spreading false rumors and marking down and eliminating the few individuals who were judged capable of becoming dangerous. But no attempt was made to indoctrinate them with the ideology of the party. It was not desirable that the proles should have strong political feelings. All that was required of them was a primitive patriotism, which could be appealed to whenever it was necessary to make them accept longer working hours or shorter rations. And even when they became discontented, as they sometimes did, their discontent led nowhere, because being without general ideas, they could only focus it on petty grievances. The larger evils invariably escaped their notice. The great majority of proles did not even have telescreens in their homes. Even the civil police interfered with them very little. There was a vast amount of criminality in London, a whole world within a world of thieves, bandits, prostitutes, drug peddlers, and racketeers of every description. But since it all happened among the proles themselves, it was of no importance. So that to me is just like a perfect description of just specifically Americans. How just being concerned with the lottery, just drinking, sports games, arguing with your neighbor, just dumb shit that is not important, right? They throw that at you and it's like a pacifier. You're like, okay, sure. I'm unhappy, I'm slaving away, I barely have anything to eat, but at least I have my, my little distractions, right? Something to get me through the day, so it's okay, it's fine. But if everybody just put all of that to the side and realize how instead of settling for these little distractions, these little things, right, to get us all through the day, we could actually have more. We wouldn't have to settle for distractions. We wouldn't have to settle for the bare minimum. You could just have everything. You could just be happy, right? But everybody, I think, because that's just where we're headed, just being ignorant, a lack of education, just being distracted by shit that is so not important, that is what's keeping us all down. That is what's keeping us all from uniting, right? You argue with your neighbor, these petty, dumb things, right? You, not even just your neighbor, with anybody. Just dumb arguments that make you hate other people, that make you not want to unite and fight for the greater good. And in the story, right, Winston says that the only hope of a rebellion, of revolution, lies in the proles. That if they just woke up and realized that the world that they were living in could be different, that the world is different, that change is possible, right? Something more than what you have right now, than what you're experiencing, that hope lies only in the proles, because they make up 85% of the country, right? If they were to unite, organize, nobody would have to conspire in secret. Nobody would have to be afraid. Just direct action. Just have a plan. Come together, have a plan, and execute that plan. There would be nothing stopping us. I say this in all of my videos. Like, if we all just put aside the fact that yes, some people will die, right? Yes, something really horrible could happen. Yes, all of that is true. But purposely not taking action, just letting it happen because you think, well, it's gonna happen anyways. Like, no. Innocent blood has already been spilled. But if you are doing it for the greater good, it will not be in vain. That is the difference, is that people think I could be hurt, I could die, somebody I care about could be hurt or die. But they're already killing all of us. They're already coming for all of us. Wouldn't you much rather die fighting for what is right, for what you believe in, for a better future? We may not see the fruits of our labor in this lifetime, but to know that we were the ones who basically set the tone, who got the ball rolling, who made it so that in the future things could be better. We're at the starting point, right? To actually take action, to actually do something. But people think, I'm gonna be uncomfortable, I'm gonna be hurt, I'm gonna have to suffer. You're already suffering. The suffering will only get worse from here. It's the truth, it is. My next point is altering history. So in the story, Winston's job, he works in the records department, which is basically in charge of altering everything, right? Magazines, books, newspapers, everything, the works, just altering everything so that the party is always right. Always. That whatever the party has said in the past, forget that. Here's the new truth. Just accept it and just be okay with that. And even Winston himself falls victim to this because he doesn't even know how old he is. He doesn't actually know what year it is, what day it is. There's no record of anything. And it scares him, right? Because he says, the past starting yesterday has been abolished, every record destroyed, every book rewritten, every picture repainted, every statue, street, building renamed, every date altered. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. No one knows their age, birthday, anything about the old world, or really even when the present world came to be the way that it is, right? The party says, in the past everybody was poor, there was just horrible things going on, people were just dying, it was just horrible times, right? The dark times. And now that the party is here, everything is better, nobody is starving, everybody is fine, just bullshit, right? Because Winston is I'm looking at, he looks around at his life, surroundings, the world, and none of that is true. To alter history, and that has already been happening. That's already been happening because, look, a prime example, Robert Maxwell. Ghislaine, I think that's how you say her name, Ghislaine, I don't know how the fuck you say her name. Maxwell, right? Epstein's partner. Her father owns a printing press, which was in charge of educational textbooks. So all of the textbooks that even I had, right, when I was in school, just all of the textbooks, somebody who was and I don't know, right, I don't know the extent of this, but just the fact that somebody so evil, their father was in charge of printing out books, textbooks, history textbooks, just the textbooks that we're forced to learn from. The fact that he had anything to do with that, to have to question your education, that's just frightening. In a part of the story, Winston ends up going down to where all of the proles live, and he goes into this pub and kind of tries to have a conversation with this older man who he knows was alive, before the party came to be. And so he tries to ask him what his life was like and what the world was like before the party. And the old man is just so, I don't know if it's just because he is a drunk, right? At least that's the way that I interpret it, is that the old man is kind of a drunk. And he can't even form a coherent thought. He can't remember anything. everything that he says to Winston, like his answers are just kind of gibberish. It's not really anything. And so I did copy some of this from the book. It says, the only evidence lives on in your mind. The older generations had mostly been wiped out in the great purges of the 50s, and the few that survived had long ago been terrified into complete intellectual surrender. So even though some people, you know, were still alive that were like just older generations, their brains were just so fried, they were so afraid that they just didn't even try to rebel. They just accepted it and were like, okay. And then everybody else who probably did try to fight back was wiped out in purges, right? So there really is no connection to the old world. So even if that link does exist, it's inaccessible simply because it's just not a solid thing. There's no way of knowing. The older people could not tell you, right? Their brains are just so fried. And that's scary, because even to know what a paperweight is, right? Because in the story, Winston buys this little like paperweight, and it's like a piece of coral stuck in this like clear little, it's a paperweight, but he's like, what do you think this is? Like, what do you think this was used for? And what do you think is like in there? Like, he and Julia both don't know anything about the old world. And Winston really desperately wants to know, because even he was alive as a child during those times, but because everything is just so fuzzy and screwed up, like, has it ever, and a prime example of this is like when something like a business, right, is there for like ages, and you know that it's there, you remember, and then it closes down and gets replaced with something else. Eventually, as time goes by, you're kind of like, what was that before? Like, what was that? Like, even though there was a time in your life when you can remember clearly, you'd seen it 1,000 times, you remember, you know what it is. But as time goes by, your memory kind of starts to get fuzzy, you forget things. Like, if there is no record to remind you, you forget. And that's just it. You just don't even remember. If you're lucky and that memory lives on in your head, that's all you've got. But people, you know, there's no way to prove it because you don't have anything to back it up. It's just a memory in your head. And like I already said, they end up finding a way to plant false memories into your head. And I'm sure if they can do that, they could probably extract some to get you to forget, right? And maybe that's not anything, but just the fact that there is no way to reconnect with the past, with history, is scary, right? Like, to be able to say this is true and have something to back it up, like, that's powerful, right? To have a proper testimony, that is a powerful thing. And the next point that I want to make, as this helicopter is like going over my car, this is like the second time it's come by, as I've been sitting here, is mass surveillance. So like I already kind of touched on, the thought police, right? They expect everyone around you to also police you and watch you and turn you in. But they have telescreens which can record, watch you, listen, right? And, you know, in the story it sounds really extreme, but we already kind of have a version of that, which is our phones, smart TVs, tablets, Alexa, right? PS5, because that has like a camera, Xbox One, I wrote some other things, drones that are constantly in the sky, and cameras on the street, specifically flock surveillance cameras, if you have seen those. And those, you know, all of those are prime good examples, but the ones that freak me out the most are obviously your phone, because you carry that around with you. Like, has it ever happened where you're talking about something and then later on you see like an ad for it, or just something like pops up to where it's like related to that? The scariest is when you just think about something and then it also appears just in an ad or just like on your feed or whatever. But the main ones are just drones that are constantly in the sky watching over all of us, that in my previous video, I brought up how they use, like, how they disguise drones to look like airplanes, and I did like add a clip, and somebody said no, that's a real airplane, and I'm not gonna dispute that, because what do I know about like aviation and just like airplanes and stuff? Like, obviously I could be wrong. I'm not gonna go back and forth about that. But earlier today I actually did manage to capture a video. So, and I'm gonna put a picture of what the actual like airplanes look like, because again, they're disguising them to look as airline airplanes. And this one definitely looked like an airplane, but, and you'll see, I kind of missed when it was doing its turn, but you'll see, like, when have you ever seen a commercial airplane make a turn mid-air and just head in another direction? Like, no, if that's a plane carrying people, it's got a destination and that's where it's going. It's not gonna just change course in the middle of, you know, flying overhead. And I'll insert the clip. You can kind of see where it's making that turn and it heads off in an entirely different direction, which is how I know it wasn't a real one. But just the fact that they do use drones to watch all of us, that they disguise them to look as airplanes, right? When something does go down, because I think it's inevitable, when something does go down, people are not going to see it coming, because so many people are going to think, oh, that was a real airplane. But another thing is how specifically Amazon, and I saw this the other day, and I'll insert a thing here so you know what I'm talking about, how they're using drones to drop off packages now. And that scared me too, because again, like, when shit starts to, you know, when they stop trying to pretend and hide, right, guess what? They are going to use drones that look inconspicuous, harmless, just these random things, like just normalizing having drones and fucking robots and AI do everything, so that when the Great Reset, right, when they try to do that, like, once it's time, we're all gonna be so conditioned and so used to seeing these things everywhere that when shit happens, we're not gonna see it coming. That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying hard to articulate this whole video. I've been trying hard to articulate, but that's what I'm getting at, is that it's going to be so normalized. You will not see it coming. You will not. And the biggest thing that I want to talk about is flock, like, surveillance cameras, which are everywhere. But I did hear this story. So in May 2025, the sheriff of Johnson County, which I believe is Texas, Adam King, I'm gonna say his name, he denied that they were using flock cameras to track, right, this woman. So initially he said that they were using them because they believed for her to be like a missing person, or somehow she was related to a missing person case. I believe it was her. I'm gonna insert the article, but that's what he initially said, right? But then when it actually came out what they were using that database, right, that flock cameras just have collected and just compiled, they were actually using it to track her to see if she had gotten an abortion, right? So let that sink in. Think about that. So even just having control over your own body and what you do to it, now that is, I mean, since forever women have been policed about literally everything, right? Having abortion rights revoked a couple years ago, but now they're using the cameras on the street to see, to watch, to try to persecute you for doing something to your own body. And in the end, right, they didn't charge her. She wasn't charged with anything. They just, right, they let it go. What ended up coming out, right? What ended up coming out about this sheriff? He was arrested and indicted on felony counts of sexual harassment, whistleblower retaliation case, and perjury. That was the other one, perjury. So my thing is just like, and listen, the police, I don't like them. I don't like the military. I don't like the police. I don't like any of those institutions, right? But cops already are just so like corrupt, right? Like they're thugs. Like they're a fucking gang and they're thugs, and they'll kill you. They'll rape you. They'll stalk you. It doesn't matter. They'll do just fucked up shit to people and think I'm untouchable because my fucking coworkers, right, are just as fucked up, doing more or less the same things, and they'll cover for me, right? So I'm untouchable. But to know that these thugs, right, so literally arrested and charged for sexual harassment, to know that they just have access to these tools to be able to harass people, stalk people, just commit crimes. The fact that that is something that exists, that is scary too. And I'm gonna keep just repeating, because it's the truth. That is scary. That is frightening, and it's not right. Like, it's not right that you have to like look over your shoulder because you don't know if somebody or something is watching you. There's fucking cameras everywhere. There's drones everywhere. Your phone listens to you. There's never a moment where you're alone. They use everything about your life, you, as a way to sell you something. To have curated ads be sent your way. To just sell you your fucking life. Everything. Just to monetize it, to capitalize on it. Right? The thought police in the story, right? They watch you. They know everything about you to the point where they know what your biggest fear is, to then use it later to torture you. That is where we're all headed. That's where we're headed. And it's really aggravating that people still just don't care. And what's worse is that there's people who support that shit, who are more than okay with just throwing their hands up and saying, I submit, I accept. They're counting on that. They're hoping that everybody is just okay with that and just doesn't care and just accepts it. That we end up living in 1984, where you can't even say 2 + 2 = 4, because you'll be just charged with something, just tortured, taken away. That's it for you. They got you. Something as simple as that, you can't even just express yourself, be an individual, have an original thought, rebel, freedom of speech, just any freedom. That's where we're headed. That's where we already are. But there is still time. There's still hope for us to undo this. We just need to come together. Wake up, come together. There's no other way for me to say that. So my last and final point that I just kind of want to throw in at the end here was millionaire status. So in 1984, Winston says how the only thing that the pros genuinely care about and pay attention to and like just give any sort of importance to is the lottery. And he says how few like rewards, right? Few amounts of money are given away to kind of maintain the illusion that the lottery is real, but none of the like the bigger prizes, right? Like there is no real winners to that, and there's no actual prize. It's a lie, right? It's a lie, and all the party members know, and the pros believe it to be true. They really believe that someday they'll win and be millionaires, right? And I think that's a really big thing in this country, at least, because the amount of just like, at least in the last couple of months, I feel, or maybe just, I want to say within the last year into this year, the amount of just like apps that you can use to gamble, right? Like, what's that called? Like sports gambling, like parlays or whatever. Like, that has just been on the rise. Like, I know that gambling has always kind of been a thing, but I think now that they've been able to just make an app for you to just be able to gamble anytime, anywhere, just copious amounts of your money, like no filter, no regulation, just you want to bet, here you go, easy access. Like, I mean, you can be addicted to anything, but I think gambling is a really big one, simply because people think if I gamble, if I'm lucky, like I could hit it big and I won't have to live in poverty anymore and I'll have that millionaire status. Okay, a prime example of this. So the Old South Diner in Nantucket, Massachusetts has sold 5 jackpot lottery tickets in the last 2 years, right? And so let's really think about that. How that is totally staged and planned. Because what are the chances that a specific location just so happens to be where copious amounts of people have won the lottery, right? Like, that's almost too perfect. That has to be planned. Like, that can't, the people who are winning those things are not real. Like, I think anybody who comes out and says, I won the lottery and whatever, like, they're an actor, they were paid for that, and they don't actually win anything. It's just to keep the illusion going, to make you believe, to make, you know, us common folk believe that the lottery is real and that you can also win, right? It's like, look at this person, their whole life has changed for the better. It could be you too. Buy a ticket today. Like, the lottery is not real. They expect you to throw away your hard-earned money, give it to them, right? Think about what they must do with all of that money. Like, all of our taxes go into war, perpetuating wars, and what I think is just like paying for those demons and their demonic like endeavors, just evil shit, to just bomb children, to traffic children, just evil shit. But either way, I really do hope that you take some time to hopefully read this book. Just consider, like, you just listen to everything that I've said and you read the book and you can compare and maybe like find your own examples of just things that are related to themes in this book, because it really did open my eyes even more and just make me want to rebel even more. I'm already a very rebellious person, but reading that book, I was like, dude, no, that's unacceptable. I would never allow that. I'd rather literally fight and potentially die than to just accept that and live in that kind of world. Like, just everything. I read it and I felt so like frustrated and just scared and just sad that could even be anything that's, you know, real. And it's only because we are really headed there. We're not gonna let that happen to us, right? We're gonna push through, prevail, persevere, and not let this world become this dystopian, just fascist, just no freedom, just this horrible fucking world. I refuse, and you should refuse too. So all I have left to say at the end here is, be good, do your best. I love you, God loves you, and if you don't already, love yourself. So yeah, thank you. Peace. Bye.